Hello, I'm Sherry Mason, elected artist member of the AAPL. Today in this 30-minute instructional video, I would like to share with you the ways that I overcame the frustration of painting on plein air. I've been a studio painter most of my career, but in 2018 I was introduced to on plein air and I was very frustrated. I approached the canvas just like I was doing in the studio. I didn't think anything about it, but the atmospheric conditions and lighting conditions changed so fast that it will just make you crazy. What I learned is that if you'll use a limited palette, do a grisaille underpainting and this grid, it's a whole lot more fun. You know, short of using DEET bug spray on the ground right before you start, and having the equipment that will help you keep it from being blown over or thrown over, and you've got an umbrella for like a shade buddy to keep you cool. It's worth it, because you'll see colors in the atmosphere that you're not going to see in the studio. Now you can see, if you're painting on plein air in the studio from life, it's the same thing. This is for the landscape outside. If you're a landscape painter, you're going to be able to do a much better masterful piece if you will infuse that. Take studies back into the studio and do the larger pieces there. You'll see colors and you'll put stuff together, and it's just beautiful how it all comes together. You can take reference photos. I don't advocate depending on them, but I do use them because sometimes I see just the most special light patterns, and I lock those in, but I get the colors the way that they are while I'm painting on plein air. So anyway, I hope that what I share with you today will inspire you and help you to get out there and try it again. You'll be glad you did. And I understand if you don't. It is very, unless you don't, if you love to be outside, that's one thing, but if you are not an outdoor person, just forget everything that I'm telling you. But anyway, if you love being outside and you love to paint and you love to paint realism, then I encourage you to keep on trying and pushing through, because you'll get faster at it and it'll be worth it. Thank you for watching. So starting with an oil primed canvas, I apply straight Gamsol or odorless mineral spirits to my canvas so the surface is ready to receive the first wash. Here I wipe off the excess and then start to look for my composition or my no-tan or thumbnail sketch. The luxury of my process is I get to wipe, redraw, and keep adjusting until I start to see the direction I want to go. Notice I start thin. I leave the sky in this piece white and untoned. I start thin, and as I progress out, I use thicker and darker washes to find what I might be looking for. In and out, wiping here and there, raising the horizon line, lowering the horizon line, making sure it is clear of the middle of the canvas. Push and pull with lights and darks, and I play around with ideas. I use Q-tips to wipe out significant highlight areas. I draw, brushing in and out, almost abstractly, creating passages, paths, valleys, peaks, as if I'm clearing and creating a little world. To better understand what I'm saying, have you ever seen the clouds situated just right until it looks like a tunnel leading into another world? Very ethereal. It's all shades of blue and purple, grays and violets, mostly, so it's almost like a grisaille in the sky. I repeat this until I see it beginning to form in my mind on the canvas. At this point, I have determined I want more values and depths in the 6 to 9 value range. So I paint over everything in the darkest value I have decided, and then brush and wipe out again what I had previously done and more strongly capture the essence of what I want. It's important that throughout the grisaille underpainting that every edge is kept soft. We want to save the hardest edges for the focal point once it appears or we have decided what it will be, and those hard edges will most likely be done in one of the later passes of color. You'll see me using a Q-tip or paper towel to enhance or create the passages that most resembles air and atmosphere, and that gives the painting light and life. The grisaille portion of my painting process is liberating to me. I'm not locked in yet. I can change my mind and explore all of the what ifs, and it's fun. I find this way easy on my controlling personality type. In the studio, you have that luxury. On plein air, you don't. But now we have found a way to do it and enjoy it too. So here I've changed my mind and decided the perspective needs adjusting, and I want to move the 2 trees. I've temporarily marked the center of the canvas so that I can avoid or place whatever I want here. Usually though, it's a good idea to avoid drawing attention to this spot. So if you mark it, it marks the spot to avoid. Now I start to hone in on where my light is going to fall, and everything going forward will be painted so that the value will dictate where the shadows are and where the light will hit, so that it makes sense to the eyes. Notice the grisaille underpainting at this point can be divided into 4 to 5 value masses or shapes: the sky, the foreground and the field in the back, and the line of trees, which could be subdivided into 2 more. Adhering to these final values will retain the sense of depth once I start the color passes, only modulating the color as each zone gets closer to the light source. As you can see by now, the light source is coming from the left. Even the foreground is lighter from left to right. The time of day will resemble late morning or high noon, so that the tops of the trees on the right side begin to have light spilling over them, and the trees on the right will have the left side being directly hit. I do get ahead of myself somewhat by adding imagined trees here and there and such, but these primarily serve as markers where I want to wipe out certain areas around them to further emphasize the atmosphere within the value. But at this point, I am still painting large shapes and no detail. Basically, each of these zones represents the middle value of that mass, and that allows me to wipe out or darken within each zone without breaking down the believability. When I am satisfied with the underpainting, while it is drying, I begin to mix the middle value of color for each value mass. I won't mix all the colors for this video, but since green seems to elude many artists, I thought I would show you how I began the greens in this piece. Notice I've placed gray palette paper under the glass of my palette And then using blue painter's tape, I have taped the glass down and onto the sides of my box so that cleanup is a breeze, and I will have the gray paper to gauge whether the color I've mixed is true to the value I established at the onset. The value of the paper is a middle range value of 5, so everything can be assessed for correct value. Remember, it is easier to paint when at least one of the 3 factors has already been worked out. Otherwise, without a grisaille, you have 3 areas to address when trying to figure out what isn't working or why something doesn't look right. Did you know that cadmium lemon or yellows mixed with a black, and in this case the Van Dyke brown, makes some beautiful shades of green? And adding a little white will help make these darker value greens less chromatic and drop them into the distance nicely. Of course, most every painter already knows mixing blue and yellow will make a vibrant Kelly green, but that's going to be too chromatic for my purposes today. But it's a good start for the bluer side of the greens I'll need in shadow. One way to tone this chromatic green down is to use a touch of the complementary color for the dominant primary, which in this case is blue. Therefore, orange being the complement will keep the value closer to what is needed to tone it down, as opposed to using white, which will also tone it down, but it will raise the value. Now I've elected to use a touch of this other green to harmonize the color and tone it down, but I could also use my orange that I mixed earlier from the cadmium lemon and alizarin crimson, but I'll use it later in the demonstration. The reason or principle behind using Van Dyke brown is it being a warm black. I have tapped into the existing warm yellow and red oxide that is in that color just enough to tone down or lessen the chroma of my cooler green I made with the ultramarine blue and yellow. Now I am moving the 2 greens I have mixed up towards the top of my palette, next to the other darks on my palette, as advocated by most artists. Setting up your palette the same way every time speeds you up because you're not thinking about where your colors are. What's unusual about my setup here, I've noticed on Plein I put all of my lightest colors on the left and place my darks on the right, in order to keep them from messing up my brightest colors. In the studio, perhaps because I paint with 12 to 15 colors, I typically set up my lightest colors on the right. It's so funny, but the main takeaway is consistency. Like keys on a keyboard, piano, or computer, your hands just know where to go. I have decided to mix one more green using the renowned blue and yellow mixture. Only this time I will use the burnt sienna, a complementary orange, to tone down the chroma instead of the Van Dyke brown that I used in the other mixture. There's so many greens in the landscape, I find it very helpful to have warm and cool greens already mixed, and one more will give me the added benefit as to how this new green will compare with the other 2. As you can see, I'm getting ready to move this new mixture up to the dark section of the palette. Mixing remnants of the leftover paint, in my opinion, further enhances the harmony in my painting, although I know many artists do not advocate doing this. I have found in my experience that all the colors are bouncing around in the atmosphere and affecting each other, and there are times when one can effectively enhance this concept, although you can't just do this randomly. Mixing randomly will give you muddy, grayed down colors, which is fine if that is what you are looking for. I happen to love all the shades of gray as they lend themselves to the soft transitions in my paintings. Like I said before, paint the way you want to paint. Learn how to make the colors do what you want them to do, and effectively use what you've learned. I plan to follow up with an in-depth video for the color mixing portion of this video to post on my website later on. So if you are interested in that level of detail, sign up for my newsletter at sherrymasonart.com to be alerted when that video is posted. Once I'm ready to start the first pass of color, which in this case is the very next day, I'll first very thinly and carefully wet the surface with Gamsol to get the canvas ready to receive it. Since the sky portion of my painting is not toned, in most cases, because I do not want that area to be affected by the warm underpainting color, I can also begin to work on that area while the rest of the painting is drying. The wind has picked up and the clouds have created a nice opportunity for me to get a contrast for this piece. Remember, in the beginning of this video I shared that at times the sunlight peeks through and illuminates the far distant hilltop where one can see a house and barn with a field below. Sometimes the contrast is so strong the rooftops are silvery white and the barn is red, so that the whole area glows against beautiful complementary greens, which are subdued by the cloudy sky. Once I'm ready to start the first pass of color, which in this case is the very next day, I'll begin by mixing my sky color and comparing my shades of blue I mix against the present sky colors because I like the effect and I think it will complement the story I'll be telling behind the painting. I used my palette knife to compare my average sky color I plan to use. Notice I will twist and turn it to get the true color I have mixed. In this painting, I will be using the quick drying white and ultramarine blue, toned down using the yellowy red oxide attributes of the Van Dyke brown in order to subdue it and achieve the effect I'm looking for. I'll spend quite a lot of time getting the sky as close to finished as possible in order to keep it bright and clean. Notice I'll go below the imagined treetops in order to take advantage for future sky holes in those areas. Plus, the mixture will also assist in carefully transitioning and keeping those edges nice and soft. I'll finish the sky using touches of yellow and purple as I get to the treetops in order to achieve the atmospheric depth and distance. I'll also use the beloved Q-tip and Viva paper towel to enable me to keep the edges soft or take away the blue in order to create the widest parts of my clouds and give them shape. Now I'm ready to paint the most distant mountains. I keep a transparency in my bag to assist me in keeping the value the same as what I've established in the underpainting. The beauty of the underpainting is that one aspect of the painting has been worked out, and now all I have to do is match it and achieve the right hue and saturation. Using this transparency allows me to try it on before I apply it. It's so liberating. I know so many artists advocate it's just paint, but I'll confess, my paintings are a part of me, and the last thing I want to do is scrape it off or scrap it because it was wrong in the first place. It's not just a painting to me. For the remainder of this video, I will just let you sit back and watch. I'll watch right along beside you and try to anticipate questions that you might have, and then I'll comment on the remaining equipment that I use when I paint in the sun or in the harder than normal wind conditions. Here is one of the areas where I will use the color shaper that I shared with you earlier for drawing or blending to model and form shapes. Remember, I also shared that the colors were bouncing all over the place as well. So I will very carefully borrow the colors from one area to the other, making lights and shadows for each of the areas initially, so that I begin to get a sense of distance and place. At this point, I have determined that the little sunlit spot on the distant hilltop will be my focal point. Therefore, I will spend quite a lot of time on this area before leaving it, because I want to use the alla prima benefits to make the subtle transitions between the trees and the fields, using colors from each area to make my highlights or shadows, borrowing colors from each, because like I said before, all the colors are bouncing off of each other, so it makes perfect sense to me to do it this way. Here I am using the Dagger Striper brush that Princeton makes. I really like it for making the edges straight. The brush head is shaped just like a dagger and has been used in the automobile industry for pinstripes and detailing, but they are awesome brushes one can use to create foliage, grasses, and lines as well with varying thicknesses. If you've never tried one, you're missing out on a great tool. Notice the clouds are really moving fast and the winds are picking up speed. I generally don't paint in this kind of weather, but since I'm in my backyard studio, I can pick it up at a moment's notice and get inside. On this day, the winds were 10 to 20 miles per hour, 76 degrees, and a 7% chance of rain. The Sienna Painter tripod has a great hook onto which I hook my heavy backpack. If even more security is needed, the rubber feet can be removed and replaced with stakes that can be grounded much like a tent. I have never dared to try to paint in those conditions. That is way out of my comfort zone, but I mention that tidbit for those who might consider it or want the preparedness in case they have no choice, as in a competition. Now I begin laying in my darkest darks in that shadow area. I try to connect all the darks for a stronger composition, leading the viewer's eyes throughout the painting the way I would like. Now I will block in the rest of this first pass of color with the average local color, all the while matching the value and color temperature needed to model and form the shapes without any detail. Here is where the grisaille underpainting keeps you on track for a successful rendering of a color study to use in the studio later for a larger rendering, or to finish out in a more polished studio gem. Once the first pass of color is nearly complete, I can't help but begin throwing a few details here and there, creating and beginning the storytelling of this piece. I had to make an adjustment on the upper left tree line near the sky, and it was too wet at this point to do anything with it yet. Well, wouldn't you know it, it did start raining and I had to pack up quickly. A great idea shared by one of the plein air painters I paint with was to always sign the back of your painting so there's never any doubt who painted it. Of course, the raindrop would prohibit me from signing all of my name for this video, but you get my point. I'll come out for a short while tomorrow with the second and final pass of color to finish this painting. I'm glad I kept softening the edges with the brushes and paper towel as I went so that there are no hard edges to deal with the next day. So here is the next day. The winds are still an element to deal with, and now we also have the sun to deal with as well. Glad I have an umbrella called a shade buddy for those days when the wind isn't quite this strong. The day is much brighter than the first 2 days, but I have locked in most of my color and the values, so I will be able to go by my memory and capture the highlights for the same time of day during which I started, so I accurately depict the scene. As I sat looking at this painting the night before, I decided I needed some element of life in the field, so I got my transparency out and made a few shapes to suggest a woman in the field, looking up at that place on the hilltop, all lit up by the sun, recognizing it as her new dream.